Okay, everyone. Hello, hello. So I'm going to describe 5 carnivorous plants that I recently saw while hiking at a place called Chapada dos Veadeiros National Park, which is in the central Brazil, in the northern part of the state of Goiás. I was there for a weekend hiking around. This is not my first time. Went there for the first time in 1993. So it's been over 30 years. I've been there multiple times, found numerous carnivorous plants there. And it's a place that has tons of beautiful trails and waterfalls, also known for the beautiful Sempre Vivas, Eriocalaceae family, large fields of them. They look like fireworks, the flowers. And what I didn't remember is that at this time of year, there's a lot of bugs. So luckily I brought my little mosquito net burqa to protect my face when I'm taking pictures of all the little flies and bloodsuckers going in my ears and nose and eyes. But anyways, beautiful place. Love going there. First, I'm going to talk about a plant that was only known from Chapada dos Veadeiros, as well as one other location. It's probably one of the rarest Utricularia in the world, and also one of the smallest Utricularia and flowering plants in the world. It's called Utricularia biovularioides. So there was only one known collection from Chapada dos Veadeiros and one from somewhere in the Amazon, hundreds, thousands of kilometers away. I did find it there many years ago at the Chapada dos Veadeiros. I also found it at another place further west in Brazil called Chapada dos Guimarães. Anyways, on this latest trip, I found 2 locations with it. It's this tiny little hair-like stolons and tiny little white flowers. They grow in seepages. And they're really hard to spot unless you really know what you're looking for. They're little white dots growing on like mats of filamentous algae, often together with sundews and other eutrix and gilicia. So it's just like growing in the muck. And I guess this species is an annual because these habitats tend to dry out a lot in the dry season. Anyways, tiny little plant. I saw it in 2 different locations. And yeah, so that's the first species. Second species is another eutric called Utricularia laciniata. Utricularia laciniata is pretty widespread in central Brazil, but the one that grows here in the Chapada dos Veadeiros is pretty unique in shape. It has like this 4-lobed lower lip, and the flowers are usually white to light lilac. In other places, especially in the state of Minas Gerais, where I've seen it many times, usually the lower lobe is not 4-lobed, it's just an entire apron-like lobe, and it tends to be more pinkish or purplish. I believe this is an annual species, and it can be seen tons of places at the Chapada dos Veadeiros. It's a very common species there. It's one of my favorites. Very unique shape to the flower. Another species, which for me is represents the Chapada dos Veadeiros in many ways, is a gilicia which nowadays is known as Gilicia tuberosa, because it literally forms little tubers during the dry season, survives the dry season that way. It's closely related to Gilicia aurea, but it's smaller. It has a yellow flower. The leaves are a little gooey like Gilicia aurea as well, but not as gooey. And several years ago, about 10-15 years ago, we were not aware that this was a new species yet. I used to call it Gilicia pygmaea, maybe the large form of Gilicia pygmaea. And I was collecting some for herbarium specimens like 10-15 years ago. I think it was 2006 approximately. And this was close to the beginning of the dry season, I believe. So the plants are sort of withering and dying. And as I started cleaning the soil away in the field, I noticed that there were these little tubers in the middle of the rosettes. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, this is a tuber species. And then I remembered my friend Thomas Carroll from Germany. Years and years ago in the 1980s, he went to Brazil, hiking at a place called Diamantina. And he reported tubers in Gilicia, and I just thought he was crazy. He'd gotten mixed up. Anyways, turns out he was right, and what we were calling Gilicia pygmaea were actually several different species, and one of these, the largest of these, is actually what we named Gilicia tuberosa a few years later, and it's the only known Gilicia that forms little tubers. So yeah, I saw plenty of this. It's very common in the Chapada dos Veadeiros area. I saw it in multiple locations. It's a beautiful little plant, very abundant. Another species that I'm going to talk about here, so the fourth carnivorous plant species, is a sundew. There's many sundews in Chapados Veadeiros. I think Chapados Veadeiros might be the place in Brazil that has the most species of sundews, or close to it. But it's very confusing, actually. I still haven't figured out everything there. There's apparently some hybrids going on, maybe between communis and Hertella. There's these really weird habitats. Hertella, Drosera Hertella, is a species that normally goes dormant in the winter dry season. But it grows in some really wet habitats at the Chapados Veadeiros, and I don't really understand whether they grow wet year-round, whether they actually go dormant or not. And so one thing that's very confusing, and it took me ages to realize, is that there's another species there that's very similar to Hertella. It's actually closer to Drosera lutescens, which used to be a variety of Drosera Hertella. There used to be Drosera Hertella variety lutescens, and a few years ago, in the publication that I did with Andreas Fleischmann and others of the Drosera Brazil, we split Hertella and lutescens into two separate species. They're both species that grow in relatively dry habitats, that really dry up in the winter and they go dormant. But then I realized that there was another species in this group that was sort of intermediate between Hertella and lutescens, and at first I even thought it was a hybrid between them, until I found a place that only had this one hybrid, and so that helped me realize that it was actually a good species on its own. In this publication of Brazilian sundews that we did a few years ago, we didn't have time to actually publish it, so we lumped it with Drosera lutescens, which it was closest to. Either way, this species grows at the Chapados Veadeiros. It's very similar to Drosera Hertella. It also has like a flower scape that grows first horizontally and then vertically, so it's an ascending flower scape. Why some sundews do this, I don't know. Is it something to avoid getting knocked over by wind? I don't know, but either way, they're very similar. That they have red hairs on the flower scapes. Drosera Hertella tends to have more sort of a spoon, or more like a wedge-shaped leaves. And at the Chapados Veadeiros, it tends to be green or reddish, whereas this new species, which I don't really have a name for yet, but it tends to have more spoon, narrower leaves, sort of flimsier leaves as well, if that makes sense. They're like thinner, and so it's more sort of a narrow spoon shaped, and they tend to be darker red in color. And so I'm adding some pictures here of the habitat, where it grows like sort of in sandy, grassy habitats, often with Hertella side by side. There's even a picture I'm sending here where I'm holding some plants up, and there's like 2 green rosettes of Hertella and 3 green rosettes of this new species. And so yeah, it took me many years to figure out that this was actually a separate taxon growing with Hertella, not just variation of Hertella. Last of all, I was extremely lucky on this trip to see for the first time Philcoxia corensis. So Philcoxia is a relatively new genus of plants that was also relatively proved to be carnivorous. So the genus was published, I think like 25 years ago, only 20 years ago, with 3 species. And since then, several other species have been found. The original species tended to grow in sand dunes, like really deep sand, white sand. And then some of the more recent species have been found to grow in sandy savanna, what we call cerrado vegetation, which is just a type of savanna in Brazil. And so I've added some pictures of the habitat here. It's just a very thin layer of whitish sand on the surface. Then underneath, I dug down a bit, and it was like very black sand with a lot of organic matter. But you'll see in the habitat, it just looks very sandy with a lot of typical savanna trees, short trees and bushes. And it's a very localized habitat. So if I didn't have a GPS location for this plant, I would have never found it. But this was found by a friend of ours, Newbit, several years ago. I'd actually been to this area a few years before it was even discovered, and never imagined that there would be a Philcoxia there. This species grows, I don't know, maybe 40, 50, 60 centimeters high. I'm not sure if it's an annual perennial, maybe a perennial, forms these little tiny sort of stems. the leaves, it's got like these little round peltate leaves that remind me of Utricularia pubescens, but they form like these little mounds, these little rosettes in mounds. And they have sticky hairs on the leaves that are capable of capturing nematodes and digesting nematodes. So Philcoxia corensis was only known from one single site. It seems like a second location was discovered recently at the Chapada dos Veadeiros. And I'm sure there's more, it's very localized. It's not really a habitat that I would expect to see Philcoxia. I've seen some of the other ones growing in sand dunes before. But anyways, so I was extremely happy to see this species. It's got white to lilac flowers. And yeah, I saw a lot of plants in a relatively small area. I walked around a lot, but I only saw them in a relatively small area, but there were lots of plants there. And I was just really excited. I think this is my fourth Philcoxia species that I see in the wild. Let's see, I've seen Philcoxia tuberosa, Philcoxia minensis, Philcoxia baiensis, and I'm missing one. Anyways, it's a really cool little genus. There's more species to be described that have already been discovered, and it's one of the newest carnivorous plant genera. Really cool little plants, exclusive to Brazil so far. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed my 5 carnivorous plants from the Chapada dos Veadeiros that I saw last weekend, which was in late March 2025. Thank you, everybody.